Hello and welcome to Feast with Nina. Few desserts tell a story of grandeur, quite like the Eszterházy Torta. This layered cake of walnut sponge and the custard-like buttercream, which was born in the heart of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, is a tribute to an era of opulence when aristocrats frequented the elegant cafes of Budapest and Vienna. The best part about my Esterhazy Torta is that it's completely gluten-free, so even celiacs can enjoy a slice of this sweet treat. I actually made this cake for my sister who came to visit me. She doesn't eat gluten, so sometimes it's hard to find a dessert that she can enjoy. This recipe though does contain a lot of walnuts, so if you have a tree nut allergy, you may want to sit this one out. If walnuts are too expensive or not available where you are, you can also substitute for ground almonds. Join me in the kitchen and let's discover one of Hungary's most charming culinary masterpieces. For the sponge, we will need 8 egg whites, 230 grams of ground walnuts, 200 grams of castor sugar, 1 tablespoon of cornstarch, a pinch of salt and vanilla. For the buttercream, we will need 125 grams of castor sugar, 5 egg yolks, 200 grams of butter, 30 grams of cornstarch, 250 milliliters of milk, 2 tablespoons of cognac and vanilla. For the poured fondant, we will need 80 grams of icing sugar, 1 egg white, and a little vanilla. We're also going to need a bit of peach or apricot jam. This is just to create a barrier between the sponge and our poured fondant so it doesn't soak through. We'll need just about a tablespoon or 2. I also melted 20 grams of chocolate with a teaspoon of coconut oil. That's for the design on our cake. First, wipe down your mixing bowl and whisk with a bit of vinegar to get rid of any grease. This will ensure that we get the best results from whipping up our egg whites. Separate 8 eggs and place only the whites in the mixing bowl. Whip the egg whites on high speed while gradually adding the sugar, a spoonful at a time until they form stiff peaks. Gently fold in the walnuts and the cornstarch, being careful not to deflate the egg whites. Line a baking sheet with parchment paper, then use a pencil to draw 2 circles with a diameter of 20 centimeters on the parchment paper. Flip it over. Repeat until you have drawn 5 circles in total, 1 for each sponge. Using the outline of the circle as a guide, spread the meringue over the parchment paper. Repeat until you have 5 sponges. Bake the sponges at 200 degrees Celsius for 10 to 12 minutes. The sponges are very fragile when they're hot, so just let them sit for a while. Once they've cooled down, use a spatula to gently pry them off the parchment paper. And I just like to clean up the edges so all the sponges are the same size. Now it's time to make the buttercream. Whisk the egg yolks together with the sugar and vanilla. Add half of the milk and the cornstarch and continue whisking. In a saucepan, warm the remaining milk. Just before it reaches boiling point, slowly pour some of the hot milk in the yolk-sugar mixture while whisking vigorously. We're basically tempering the eggs so they don't cook. Now we're going to slowly pour the custard into the hot milk, and we need to be whisking at the same time. This bit was a bit tricky for me because I was filming, but you should really be using both hands. Lower the temperature of your stove top and continue to stir the cream until it thickens. The consistency should look like this. Remove the saucepan from the heat and let the cream cool for about 8 minutes before covering with cling film. Make sure the cling film is directly on top of the cream. This is to ensure that a crust doesn't form on the surface. We need to leave it like this until it completely cools, and only then can we whip it together with the softened butter to form our buttercream. Transfer the buttercream to a piping bag. This way it's easier for us to spread it over our sponges. Place the first sponge in the adjustable mold, then add a layer of buttercream. Alternate between sponge and buttercream until you get to the 5th and final sponge. Place the cake in the refrigerator for the buttercream to set. I left mine in the fridge for 3 hours, but if you want, you can always leave it overnight and just do the decorating the next day. Be careful when removing the cake from the form. It's best to loosen the edges with a flexible spatula or a butter knife. Warm up the peach or apricot jam to make it a bit more spreadable, and use a spatula to gently spread it over the last sponge. Let's make the poured fondant. Now there are several ways to make the poured fondant, but I find this is the simplest method. I highly recommend using pasteurized egg whites, and don't worry if you can't find pasteurized egg whites in the store. I'm going to show you how you can do it on your own. Fill a saucepan halfway with water and allow it to almost come to a boil. Place the egg white in a heat-proof bowl, then place the bowl over the saucepan with the hot water. And of course, you want to whisk consistently for the 4 minutes that you're going to be heating the egg white, so you don't end up with a scrambled egg. Finally, stir in the vanilla and icing sugar and whisk away. So we've basically just made a really thin royal icing. Set it aside while we melt 20 grams of chocolate with 1 teaspoon of coconut oil. Pour the chocolate into a piping bag and snip off the tip to create a small hole. Pour the fondant over the cake and use an offset spatula to smooth it over. Drizzle a swirl pattern with the chocolate on top of the cake. I'd suggest holding the end of the piping bag with one hand and then using your other hand to hold it just above the tip. It's always a good idea to do a bit of practice before you pipe the design onto the actual cake. Using a toothpick or the tip of a knife, drag lines from the center outward to the edge of the cake at regular intervals. Then alternate by dragging lines from the edge inward between the outward strokes. So typically this cake is covered all around the sides with ground walnuts, but I have a lot of extra almond flakes on hand that I desperately need to use up, so that's what I'm going to be using today. Also, if you have any extra buttercream, you can always do some piping around the edges. Before we add the almond flakes to the side of our cake, we need to make sure that the surface is a bit sticky so that the almond flakes can adhere properly. So you can just apply a smooth layer of buttercream to the side of the cake. Take a handful of almond flakes and gently press them against the sides of the cake. Our cake is perfect as it is. However, if you're extra like me, then you can always garnish with walnuts, piped whipped cream, or piped buttercream if you have any left over. Believe me, it tastes just as good as it looks. My sister and I enjoyed it so much that I made it again for my birthday. If you ever get a chance to visit Budapest, don't miss a chance to experience the authentic taste of the Esterhazy Torta at one of the country's finest cafes. I personally love the confectioners at the chain of Somosh cafes. Or perhaps now that you have the recipe, you could try making it yourself. Let me know what you think about this recipe. Also, let me know in the comments if you're familiar with any other Austro-Hungarian desserts. There are quite a few after all.